In this episode of 2020 How to Build a Computer, we're going to look at a basic overview of CPU coolers. So I have a Noctua in front of us, and not everybody's going to need a beast like this. So let's start with the basic ones that come with a lot of CPUs. Here are your standard CPU coolers that come with Intel or AMD. Now, depending on what type of CPU you get for Intel, it may or may not come with a CPU cooler. Alright, so here's just a few of the boxes from Intel CPUs that I have. And you can see by looking at this that box size is quite different, right? So all of these have Ks in them. Alright, here's a 9900KF, i5-9600KF, i7 8700K, and an i3-9350KF. So all those have Ks, and they will not include one of these. So that means you have to buy a CPU cooler. Alright, so over here, the i3-9100, the i5-9500, and all the ones that end in F, and the i7-9700 will have a CPU cooler. Alright, so looking at the Ryzen, so even though this box is nowhere near the size of the two behind it, this did come with the CPU cooler. Okay, now the Ryzen 5 3600X came with this one, and then the Ryzen 9 came with this really cool CPU cooler that actually has RGB on it. Alright, for most of you, these stock coolers are probably going to be good enough, right? But now for the hardcore gamers, that's another story. Now there's enough articles out there that will tell you that replacing one of these stock coolers with something more like this or the Noctua that I showed you earlier will improve your performance. Alright, so there's definitely something to be said about that. Now obviously as your CPU gets hotter and hotter, having something like this will help it out, right? So when the CPU is cooler in the beginning, performance probably is not going to change much. It's over the long run that you would notice that. If you're going to overclock, you definitely want to get some type of tower CPU cooler, preferably a dual tower, dual fan type setup, or one of the water cooled ones. We're not going to get into details on how effective those are. I do not actually consider myself an expert in overclocking, so we will not cover that subject. Alright, so other reasons to pick these type CPU coolers over these can end up being quite a bit quieter, right? So depending on what fan you get, maybe how many fans you have, you should be able to find one of these brands that will be quieter. So let's say you're looking at this video and you're not a gamer, that you want to record stuff, right? You've got your Shure SM57 mic right next to your computer or in the vicinity, and you're picking up quite a bit of noise from the computer. Good chance that could be one of these noisy CPU fans, right? So getting something like one of these, which I can't say that these are all that quiet, but I can say the Noctuas are definitely quieter. Getting something like that will help with the noise reduction. So I could not find my decibel reader, unfortunately, for this video, but this computer here actually has 6 case fans plus the 2 CPU cooler fans plus 3 fans on the graphics card, and I think that's all the fans this guy has in it. But when this thing's cranking, it can still get a little bit noisy, but at least I know that my CPU is nice and cool, and that aspect is cooler. Now, not much I can do about the graphics card. The case fans, I'm pretty happy with, the fact that this is being kept cooler. I've got the side off of this for additional cooling purposes. But you know, if I close this up, it does get obviously quieter. All right, so getting back to the Ryzen 9 CPU cooler that came with it, it can really get loud. There is no doubt that this computer, Ryzen 9 with this setup, is louder than this one. All right, so things to take into account with CPU coolers. Look at the size of your case, okay? This is obviously going to fit in any size case. These guys, they may end up being too tall that you cannot put the side panel, the left-hand side panel, back on your computer. So depending on how deep your case is and how tall your CPU fan is, or your CPU cooler is. So other things that you will have issues with later on. All right, so in my AMD setup, you can easily see my RAM in there, right? And I can still hit all 4 of those RAM slots if I wanted to. So from this angle, where in the hell is the RAM in this computer, right? So obviously back there we've got 4 sticks. I believe there's 4 sticks of 8 gig RAM. Oh, excuse me, I took one out. We've got 3 sticks of 8 gigabyte RAM in there, so 24 gigs in there right now. But how am I going to actually work on that? Not with my big hands, okay? There's just not going to work. So that is something else to think about later. I'm going to have to disassemble this whole thing possibly. I might be able to pop one fan off and get in there, but for the most part, I may have to disassemble the whole thing. Now, the other thing you got to worry about is if these things are hanging too low, hopefully I won't stick my hand in the fan, you will have issues with your RAM. So this case over here, these guys are really big, these RAM. They may cause interference there. I may not be able to get the CPU cooler on, or I might have to go with a different type of RAM. All right, so another basic thing here. If we look at these CPU coolers, obviously this tower here is a lot smaller than that guy. All right, these guys are pretty similar in size, but you know, anybody that's taken heat transfer, and somehow I happen to get a mechanical engineering degree, and heat transfer was one of the courses I took, though I can't tell you I remember that much about it, knows that the amount of surface area that you have will increase your cooling. Okay, so that's why, like this guy, you know, he is quite a bit bigger, length, width, and overall height. And then this guy is pretty similar, except it has these edges notched out, which probably in this case helps with clearance for the RAM. And then this one is, you know, just a smaller one that is probably pretty decent for some aspects, but not all. All right, so looking at this monster, you can see that we have a lot more surface area, probably twice as much as any of the other ones. So this one is definitely, you know, just based on that aspect, going to keep it cooler, keep the CPU cooler than the other two that we with CPU fans. So a couple things to look at there, and try and move these guys over. So we have different size fans, right? And if these were all running at the same speed, most likely the biggest fan would probably create the most flow. Okay, so I also took a fluid dynamics class back in the day. Can't remember the name or the exact formula. I should look it up. But the flow, you know, is going to let's just say in a pipe, and this isn't a pipe, but it's determined by the diameter, okay, and then the velocity. All right, so in a lot of aspects this is probably very similar. You've got this much smaller fan compared to the bigger one behind it, okay? So that fan's probably twice as big, and so for these to move about the same amount of flow, this may have to spin twice as fast, okay? A lot of these things spin the faster they spin, the louder they can be. All right, so I'm just theorizing that, but I think there's probably some truth in that. So going with a bigger fan, bigger CPU cooler is probably not such a bad thing. Okay. Now looking, so if we look at that aspect, between these two CPU coolers, you would think the AMD would be a lot better, right? It's got the bigger heatsink on it. It's got a bigger fan than the Intel does. All right, so that aspect, at least what AMD ships, should be better. All right, so let's jump back over to these. So, based on what I had just noted, you can obviously put more than one fan on these, as you would expect. So it's kind of like a push-pull type thing, right? You're trying to draw out the heat from this, and you may be forcing it from one side to the other, basically, is what you're trying to do. Thus keeping these heat sinks even cooler, all right? So I haven't done the math on this, but potentially 2 fans on this may be better than 1 fan and 2 heat sinks. I don't honestly know that for a fact, but obviously there are people out there that are figuring all those things out. So that would be a much more advanced topic for someone else to look at, and maybe easy enough to do here, right? You can run video games, and hopefully somewhere in this video I've shown some shots using MSI Afterburner of the CPU temperatures that I have. Well, obviously you can use those type of programs to run a CPU with something like this and just basically track the temperature through a game, and then come back, put something like this on here with 1 fan, then either a different one with the same one with 2 fans, or one of these with a different model that has 2 towers and 1 fan, and then track it again with 2 fans and 2 towers. So, most likely the 2 fan, 2 tower one is going to work the best, right? Especially if it's made by these guys. So giving them a plug. Send me some free stuff, folks. Yeah. But so there you go, folks. That is a basic overview. A lot of rambling in there. Hopefully in the editing we'll make this a little cleaner. But yeah, so basic desktop gaming, you're going to be okay with this. If you've got a K processor, you want a tower. If you're going to do any kind of overclocking, okay, you want a tower. If you want continuous performance in your gaming and you're running high-end graphics, you want some kind of cooler. All right, so the final thing, not only is performance better, but keeping that CPU cooler increases longevity. Okay, so probably the last thing that I didn't talk about, no sense stressing your CPU out over and over with high temperatures when you can cool it properly. Thanks for checking out the video. Please check out other episodes of 2020 How to Build a Computer, and I hope you got something out of this, and hopefully you at least got a better idea of, depending on what type of CPU you have, whether you get a CPU cooler or not, and whether you know in your end state. I'm going to, in this series, talk about end state a lot. If you know you want to have 4K graphics, then you're probably going to end up with something like this for sure, right? If you're happy with 720p, probably good here. 1080p, probably good here, right? 1440p, boom. You want quiet, boom. All right, so there you go, folks. Topic about CPU coolers. So I've installed quite a few of these. These aren't too bad in the beginning, these Intel ones. You see this, I'm going to assume this is plastic on the bottom, hard plastic. When you first get one of these and you install it, it's going to install pretty good. Probably not going to have any difficulties. Even comes with thermal paste, all right? So over time, though, these guys get worn out, and they're going to end up looking more like this guy does. This is going to be a lot harder to work with. So if you're like me and you like changing your CPUs around quite a bit, this isn't going to work. But if you're set it and forget it type person, this is probably going to, from that aspect, work out better. Now, AMD has one of these, and depending on which setup you have, you'll have either a backing plate or a couple brackets that fit into the existing holes. And this also comes with CPU thermal paste. Would go right on there. This one's been used, so it's been cleaned up. But notice those metal screws there, fasteners, right? This is much more solid, obviously, than Intel. So looking at a CPU cooler, don't buy one that has this kind of setup. This is cheap junk, and you'll pay for it later. I think this is a Deepcool one, which is kind of disappointing. It's either Deepcool or it's Cooler Master. I can't remember. But yeah, these just, for long term, for something this heavy, that's not the way to go. You want to have something like this that's got on the other side, it would have a mounting plate, and you would obviously screw that in with metal fasteners, right? So that's a good thing. This guy here, I don't even remember what brand this is, probably the cheapest one I could find. It did not work that great either. It's got plastic insert pins. Not the best deal either. So shopping around, folks, look for something like this, okay? And if that's a Cooler Master one, hey, good for them. These guys really know what they're doing here at Noctua, so that is just another thing to watch out for.